Mr. President, I would like to thank you. Thank you for your welcome, but also thank you for the kind words you said earlier on, words that touched our feelings. They touched my soul deeply, and I would like to tell you that on behalf of PGU, I would like to express to you the support to all Greek pharmacies for the efforts they are making. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to see the efforts that the Greek pharmacists are making, efforts which aim at protecting the Greek public. The Greek pharmacists are not getting the money they should be getting, and this should be widely known. I, of course, use the social media in order to inform the wider public on that. Earlier on, you also talked about solidarity in Europe, and I would like to tell you that the Greek pharmacists, actually shine as a model. But apart from that, we should keep in mind the economic problems that exist out there, and that is why I would like to suggest to the Secretary General of PGU to make efforts in order to enhance the issue of independence. We have 34 members, and we have different operational models, without, of course, that meaning that one model is better than the other. But the point is that we should all agree on the issue of independence. And in France, important studies were conducted on the issue of independence, and especially with regard to the legal aspects pertaining to it. But I personally believe that we will all benefit if we know what is going on in each country, which are the efforts that are being made in order to protect this independence. You asked me to talk about the Internet, and this is exactly what I'm going to do. My approach to Internet is rather practical one. We all use smartphone, we all use the Internet. The Internet, as Philippe Lieberman said earlier, is, on the one hand, a space that involves risks, but also presents great opportunities. When fire was found, it was used for various different purposes, which were beneficial, but at the same time, fire was and could be disastrous. And the same stands for the Internet. And what we should try to do is to ensure that the efforts we are making are headed towards the right direction. We cannot possibly stop the development of the Internet. This is unrealistic. I will not get into great detail. I would just like to focus on the following points. As you know, there is the European legislation. The European legislation, which, in the form of directive, sets specific guidelines. And each country, member state of the European Union that is, has the possibility to adapt these guidelines to its own reality. At this point, I would like to remind you what you probably already know. But allow me to touch upon these issues. What is the current state of affairs in France? In France, we have a legislative system on the basis of which there is first a law, then a decree, and then a decision. Now, between the law and the decision, there is the issue of the increased detail, as we call it in France. And I'm saying all this because our courts actually took some decisions, and according to these decisions, a pharmacy, a web pharmacy, an internet pharmacy, can exist as long as there is at the same time a brick-and-mortar pharmacy. The internet pharmacy must have the necessary authorization and must be approved by the regional health agency. And this type of pharmacies can only sell non-prescription medicine. These are the basic principles governing the operation of internet pharmacies. Now, when it comes to the decree enacting directive, according to this decree, the chambers and the health ministry websites must display which are the pharmacies that have both virtual and a physical presence. Now I would like to mention to you some important developments, some important facts. We have far more strict laws and rules for pharmacists who want to use also internet pharmacies, and I will give you some examples. There are the so-called chat forums. These are forbidden. On the basis of privacy issues and protection of personal data. Moreover, on the internet, there must be an interactive interchange and communication with the patient, and the pharmacist has the obligation to answer to any question that the patient may have. Moreover, there must be a questionnaire which will give information on the sex, the age, the allergies, the weight of the patient. The directives on the instructions regarding the use of the medicine must be presented in a clear and precise way. In order for a website to be established and exist, the website must not be developed by a subcontractor. Of course, we all know the pharmacist is not an IT expert, but in the end, the one that is responsible is the pharmacist and not the company that has developed the website. But the preparation of orders can only take place in the pharmacy, in the traditional pharmacy. Moreover, there can be no link with other websites of the pharmaceutical industry or the data that pertains to the health, since this data and information pertaining to the sex, the weight and the allergies is data which is considered private, and this data is stored in an agency that has the obligation to protect it. This data is stored in a repository. Now, if the website, the internet pharmacy, sells other products apart from medicines, like cosmetic products, for example, or shampoos or other type of products, then these products must be presented in a separate place on the website. These products must also be categorized. All information needs to be complete and precise. And there is also a maximum number of products that can actually be sold over the internet pharmacy. You cannot possibly, for example, buy 50 packs of aspirins. There is a maximum limit. And when it comes to the pharmacovigilance, there has to be a link to the relevant website, and whenever a patient needs information, then this information must be provided in time. These are the basic points of the decision. Now, earlier on, I talked about the different levels that exist in the legislative system in France. A pharmacist in France took a case to the court claiming that there is a decision that was not complete. He won the case. Today, of course, there is the law, and the law is rather more general. What was abolished was not abolished for reasons other than the letter. Because according to the French legislation, a decision governs specific points, and there were certain points in the decision which were not included in the law. In other words, the decision was not respecting all the necessary requirements. So today we have a decree, but we don't have a decision. There is this vagueness, if you like. Of course, it will soon be restored through the launching of a new decision that we are elaborating in cooperation with the Ministry of Health. And I can tell you right now that the new decision will be very similar, if not identical, to the previous one. So basically, we're talking about the form of the decision and not the content. As you know, a decision must be submitted to the European Commission, something that France did not do. And this was one of the reasons for which the Court of Justice withdrew the decision. Of course, now this decision is being re-examined, and if it gets approved, then I believe that this will be a very important step, and it would actually be the source of inspiration for other countries. We had drew our inspiration from the Belgian legislators, and maybe the same will happen for other countries in the future. Now, some more information. According to the law, the website of our association must state who are the pharmacists that have at the same time a virtual presence on the internet. Articles must be uploaded on the selling of medicines via the web, and especially articles covering the dangers lying behind the e-selling of drugs. On the 31st of August of 2015, we had 294 pharmacies with a virtual presence that were approved and had the authorization to sell medicines. As Philippe Lieberman reminded you earlier on, there are also other websites, among which there is the one that you can see here. It is the so-called system Click and Collect. And I would like to conclude this intervention by making a short reference to the work of the Pharmaceutical Association of France when it comes to e-selling of medicines. First of all, what we do is to check that the pharmacists abide by the provisions that were included in the decision. Given that this is a very important issue, me personally, I pressed charges against certain pharmacists. So you can understand that if me, as president of the association, ended up pressing charges on certain pharmacists, then this is a very important issue. Now, given that the decision has no vigor, is no valid anymore, there are certain rules and terms by which pharmacists have to abide, and we will keep them as they are. As I said earlier on, I had to press charges against certain pharmacists, but at the same time, being president of the association, I could not follow through this case. There were also some cases pertaining to child pornography, terrorism, and others. And I'm saying this because it relates to platforms. So, when it comes to platforms, we employed people who are responsible to check the website, check the internet. And I can tell you that our employees and inform the other interested parties, but also our colleagues inform us on rather suspicious cases. And if we actually identify that there is such a case, then we notify the platform, and Interpol is immediately notified. I have to tell you that recently we have seen some very important revelations of cases like that. It was a specific case, for example, and before the revelation of that case, Interpol had investigated a whole network that covered areas like Georgia, African countries, and others, and had found all the necessary information. In other words, there was an extended level of cooperation and exchange of information. Now, when it comes to these notifications, I have to tell you that when there are websites of the kind of that suspicious content, then very often we have, as an association, to be present at the court or to take all necessary actions. And recently we have taken necessary actions in order to block a website that pertained to activities that were going on in Marseille and were suspicious. Of course, I would like to tell you that when the new decision is issued, you will be notified. Of course, you can find all decisions on the web, but the point is that you can also get more information if you like. Thank you very much for your attention.